Good morning. How are you doing today? It is cool. Um, I did a video. I was actually hosting meetings in Atlanta, and I was doing it at what they say the what was called the Ominala, which is the old teacher or something like that, or what you've learned, something or the other. Don't get me to fibbing, but it was the Ominala, and so I was doing the video, and I just said, well, you know what, me being where I am, and then I'm like, well, you know what, we have a lot of things that we can address socially. Um, if we're looking at, let's say, the humankind, then I'm like, okay, that's one thing to talk about. It is another thing that's called action, and so word, work, witness. So it's one thing to talk about different things that you can do to, improve your world, and it's another thing that's putting action behind your words. But I was having the conversation, and I don't think that readily I was looking all the way to death. You understand? Because when you're dead, you're just not doing nothing. But when you're alive, you do move around. Even if you consider yourself in any one of those brackets or classes or parentheses that has a conveyance of, or not a conveyance, I rebuke that. But to talk about character or actions or being of a person. But anyway, I was just like, well, here it is. If it's right here, and I'm like, oh, then that's just right there. You know what I'm saying? And that shit is literal. What I mean by that is that the conversation about homelessness. I want to tell you a story, and I want it to be for real, the truth, and it really is. We had a hurricane, and during that hurricane, um, there was a lot of people who we just saw it was just really very busy in regards to responses, in regards to um, how people, where it was, how people wasn't ready or prepared for death. They weren't prepared for being homeless. They were not prepared with their documents. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that took place at that time where not only the land, or making sure that people who stay by the sea, that there were different stuff. So anyway, at the time prior to that, there were conversations about homelessness. Now, I wasn't really so much involved in those conversations at that time. At that time, I was already looking at real estate. I had purchased um, a piece of land, and I was like looking at all the opportunities that was available at that time, where the government was able to, the federal government was, because we do have housing and urban development, and how those properties could have been in turn utilized for people who were um, who may come into any of those particular situation where it was talking about domestic violence, veterans, and so on and so forth. Not saying that they didn't already have organized programs to help people, because when you look at HUD is a part of a financial structure. So when we say financial structure, we're talking about like Freddie Freddie Mac and Fannie. Okay, I didn't go into all the other details about it because that was just sufficient for me at the time with the conversation to say Freddie and Fannie Mae, okay, or Freddie and Fannie Mac. Um, I was like, wow, this is a real big financial institution. But anyway, at that time, what was happening was they were looking at different people who may have had the platform of television or radio to get the word out, to help people raise money because money was needed. But at that time, we also saw that these people that they were looking at, um, them being, the characters that they are in regards to being on TV world or radio world, wasn't necessarily prepared to address those situations. So what happened, or the conversation was, is now what could we have done to help um, not only that particular situation, but to help eradicate homelessness. So anyway, the conversation when I first come here to LA, I was like, okay, man, there was a lot of people, and I just said, well, listen, you would think that here it is, these people are looking. Yes, I went and I had applied at admission to be a volunteer, but I didn't think that at that time it was just enough. It wasn't enough to say, okay, well, I can just hand out sandwiches or feed the hungry or something like that. I wanted to really have that kind of conversation where it was relative to how we're able to kind of maximize opportunities, and that would be including community development, where community development also implies, building, okay? But then when you start looking at, let's say, the various factors about building something, you're like, okay, well, listen, yes, well, why is that a building? We could be using that building. Well, it doesn't work quite that way. There's a lot of other little different stuff, and the argument, the conversation. And it's like, well, you know what? We do have organizations that focus on people who are homeless. Now, when we start looking at people without a home, then we start looking at people who don't make enough money. Then we start looking at don't make enough money. Homeless, having employment. Now you're looking at the banks. Now you're being where you are. Now you're looking at more opportunities to make more money so that you can go up the escalating ladder. So what happens is that we have programs such as Section 8, which is part of the housing and urban development. And the reason why people are there is because they're not making the money. Okay, you understand where I'm coming from? So I'm like, well, you know what? Here it is, me. I was trying to understand why here it is, something was wanted to talk about, not homelessness, but to create some situation that way. Um, I'm gonna let you know right now, I'm not 100% pleased with here it is what I do and do not have. You understand where I'm coming from? I wanted more. Matter of fact, my mama, and my lady, they wanted me to have things. So for me, I went to go get education, and then at that time when I got the education, there was some other things that took place. Not for me to go backwards, but for me to go forward. You understand where I'm coming from? Okay. So now when you have somebody who's trying to tell you about where you want to go, oh, well, no, do this, and then the talk, I'm like, well, one moment. It's the thought. Is, yeah, I've been, let's put it like this. I meet many people every day, meaning I catch the bus or I drive my car, go to a meeting. So that's what I mean. I'm in around different people, different kinds of people every day. Do I know many people? The answer to that is I would like to. Like that. But the thing is for somebody else to want to talk about regression and not progression, or then have to say, okay, well, listen, we got this people here, and you can get that. The community block grant is different than here it is somebody trying to block you. You understand? And it's like, okay, well, why? Why is that? Matter of fact, the conversation about height and where you want to go, or being able to be in that kind of environment to say to people who are chanting or raising concerned voices, well, listen, this is the way that we can do these things. I think that was kind of like what the message was, at least like how Irene Ratliff wanted to implement it. Okay. Um, but that thought again, this way, this way, this way, this way, to talk about um, where a person is, where they want to go. So readily you'll find people who want to do anything. For somebody who want to chase me about homelessness, that's sad, baby, body, for real. Luckily, I was able, no, not, well, looking at information beyond how we may understand homelessness. Homelessness became a human right thing. It was domestic. So it didn't necessarily mean that you had to be without a home to be homeless. You understand? And it's, the misunderstanding, or maybe when we are saying it, people may think people without a home, but there are people with homes, or home away from home, or people who are in relationships, and how those things may create a domestic or a homeless situation. So that means that when I said, well, fortunately, explaining it was beyond, say, somebody who was without a home. To address, here it is, somebody who's without a home or a person with a home in a homeless situation or a domestic situation. Now we begin to look at, let's say, the different tiers. And when we say in tiers, it elevates. It goes here, 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 there. So we see the pyramid up, or we see the pyramid down, more or less. And you have some people say, well, listen, this is up and down. If you're looking at it now being up and down, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. You can see the triangular down, the triangular up, and you could put, here it is up and down. And here it is sideways. That was interesting. It didn't say anything about it being sideways, yet it was, no, that's not true. It was having a message about sideways, left or right, but then it was going up and down. The point that I'm saying is that when we begin, let me kind of reiterate what I just said. When we are looking at, let's say, people without a home, and now we know that we need to be able to find them homes, right? Or to understand why they're homeless. There's a lot of different situations that make people, for real, not be where they want to be with shelter. Now, I went to Washington, D.C., and I stayed in a homeless shelter. When I went to Washington, D.C. and was there in that homeless shelter, I wanted to understand what it was that we could have done at that time at that shelter. But there was some other stuff going on. Matter of fact, I even went around Washington, D.C. and I was, collecting information. And I'm like, well, do they know that? So I took those books and all that other kind of stuff, wanted to have conversations and all kinds of stuff to talk about how we were able to do a lot of different things. This homeless shelter was not far from the Capitol building. Okay, matter of fact, I used to jog around all over there in Washington, D.C. But at that moment, matter of fact, even before then, a little bit before then, here being in the different places that I have traveled, I wanted to actually visit what was the issue, right? And I saw where people were just kind of comfortable in their situation, or maybe people actually had traveled into that situation and they were just with company. You understand? Or they were socializing, in with that environment. So at that moment, I was just like, well, you know what? This is not that approach that I wanted to do, because I could have readily done some things in an area of let me tell you, Skid Row and we have a Mission. They're right here in Los Angeles. Okay. The thing was, when that conversation took place, or those thoughts to talk about homelessness, we have to look at not only people being unemployed, and not only unemployed, but if there's drug related, if it's domestic related, the different things that make people not only have employment, but why people not only have employment, but why people are without homes. Okay? So we've kind of seen something with my story where somebody wanted to make it seem like it was something opposite to what Irene Ratliff wanted to do. Okay? So now we're looking at people who are without employment, without any kind of resources. Now it would be like, okay, well, now we have to apply for resources, whether we're talking about the county or the city. Now we have to look at opportunities for people to get employed. Well, there are programs that are there to help people, achieve some of the, let's say, the basics, okay? Now we're looking at people who have income, who get up every day and go to work, and the conversation of owning a piece of the pie or a piece of America. Well, once that person has been on their job, hey, look at that. Not only we have to look at credit, but now we're looking at employment and then the money that they put out. That goes to the bank. So that's why I ain't gonna fib to you. I'm like, well, somewhere near where we're doing all this complaining and conversating, that those conversations about the bank, if it's readily trying to help people get homes, even under their low. I don't even know if they have a low income program. I know that readily there are people who don't make a lot of money, but how all that stuff is really kind of working. We had a lot of different programs like DACA, and you have other little programs that says that they're trying to help people, and then yet you're looking at it. They also want to help people not have any kind of debt. So I think that focus has been more on the debt and opposed to actually getting people homes, right? It's just a thought. I'm not disputing anything. I'm sure that there are people who have been successful at entering some of these programs. A lot of those programs, there were tax rebates that come back to you at the end of the year when you're filing your taxes. They'll give you X amount of dollars, like the $3,000 down or the $3,000 credit. So I don't know how successful a lot of those stories have been, especially when we start looking at that housing bubble. So if we're looking at people with low or no income, now they have to look at their finances. And if they're only making $10 an hour, then their chances of getting a home is an opportunity, because I ain't gonna fib to you. We were able to get one on $5 an hour. You understand where I'm coming from? No, not like that literally, but the thing is that you can find land for 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, and sometimes free. The thing is now when you put something on there, now they want to talk about policing. The next level is people, as I said, people who may have credit, who are just have chosen to rent or go into some other areas. Now, how is all this stuff tied into being homeless? That was a whole lot of word of opinion. But as I said, when I was there, and I'm like, hey, well, let's do this, let's do that, and those people didn't want to do none of that. So why do you suppose, if they didn't want to do it, and the people who was there that was helping them, then why do you suppose somebody's trying to promote that? I mean, there's different organizations, and I had inquired with different ones, but then readily that conversation to talk about to be with those organizations or those government kinds to say, well, listen, these are some alternatives of things that we're able to do, and yet over a period of years, then they know that. I think at that time, when I was doing real estate, and matter of fact, even before doing real estate, because I was looking at properties and stuff like that, to purchase and looking at properties to invest with and all that kind of thing. There it goes again. You need money. You would think that yet readily a lot of these people would have looked at the various programs and inquired with those programs. But if somebody wants to sit there and tell you, oh, come here, then how do you suppose they were trying to help them? Maybe they were not. So now you're looking at yourself and you're like, okay, well, listen, because that has to do with land. No, it don't. The government, actually, if you look at some different organizations and stuff, they actually are giving people land. Matter of fact, the churches, a lot of the members there, they give their land. Matter of fact, I was someplace and they had a whole little thing where you can give your whole will and your house and car and all that to the church. Okay? So I was listening to this person and he said, well, listen, you think that here it is, the churches are not involved, you don't see them. And I just said, on the contrary, they have their members. Somebody, a member of their church, they have a problem or something like that, they're able to help them. You know what I'm saying? When you knocking on the door and say, hey, I need assistance, there are many churches that do that. Is it a mutual thing? Well, they're under a religious umbrella. They have their members who are in their church, and they build within their church walls. Now, I've gone to churches too. I'm not sitting there saying that being able to feed people who don't have financial means is not cool. It's a blessing to have here with this glory to have the church, organizations to think about people who do not have, and we don't want to make any assumptions. The thing was, is though, at that time, looking at that situation, whether people were looking for dope or whether people were looking for, you know what I'm saying, sex, that sex, drugs, and rock and roll, the to address the homeless situation and to the statistics of what needs to take place, or what was the research on those kind of things, to say, okay, well, these are how we want to address these different things. And we're looking at domestic violence situation, we're looking at mothers and children, men with children. The thing is that now we're looking at, let's say, that base to say, okay, well, this is how we need to elevate people. So when I'm like, okay, well, one moment, etc., etc., then why would somebody be wanting me to regress when I'm, hey, how you doing? You understand? That doesn't make any sense. It becomes unfair. It's not one fair. Then to say, okay, well, listen, these group of people, if people don't want to go to school, and I think that was a conversation that I had about, looking at people who want to get higher education, people who want to not only get higher education, go to school, go to work, go participate, a lot of different stuff. Then you will want to have people who are readily willing to participate. When somebody else is trying to tell them not to do it, then it's not in the things that are innately their own will. Somebody else wanted to discourage them, and so anyway, you have a lot of organizations like the churches that do work with their members or work with people who go to them directly for the church to talk about politics. Yes, we have people who are politicians who may belong, or somebody who may want to support them, invite them to the church, and they have their conversation and they're conveying, yes, whatever it is that they're doing so that they can share it among the congregation. But for somebody to say, oh, well, listen, they're not involved, well, you know what? We have to look at the different churches, and when you start talking about big churches and stuff like that, what kind of programs and stuff that they have. Now, I've gone to some churches, I ain't gonna fib to you, like, what? So I'm not sitting there saying that I'm like 100 with them, but and some of us are not surprised. But for me to sit there and say that they're not doing anything at all would be false. Especially some of your larger churches. However, their circulation, their work is within, here it is, the churches. They actually have their own little category, no different than the government. The government have there, and they go here and there. But if you want me to say, okay, well, listen, you're part of this government, and all of them have their walls, and because they want to talk about their religion or the reason why they're not doing certain things, and I said, well, woman, what if I was at this place? And I said, well, if they doing all of that, and notice that they're talking about mental pages, and they don't have it, no, seriously, and they want to be, then I said, well, where are they going? Well, they're going to the government, to the other government, meaning the structured government. So why would they support to make people unhappy or whatever it is, to say a suffrage, to say, okay, well, listen, this is their government, now you come back to our government, and you just go through that whole process all over again or initial. It doesn't make any sense. That means that they didn't structure anything to say, okay, well, you know what, we want to make sure that our people, or here it is, people who are part of this different religion or this politics or whatever, has that, when it bounced, that they have something to fall on. You know what I'm saying? So when you start talking about organizing, or you start talking about different things that are there for people to accelerate or whatever, then you wouldn't be, why would our government tried to be. Anyway, there's a lot of bases, a lot of bottoms. Okay, there's different kind of bottoms. Matter of fact, I will do a video on um, lineage. Since I'm rapping, I'll talk about it. But people who are homeless, yes, honey, we care. But the thing is to that's a big entity all by itself. I think that one of the things when I was writing government was to study HUD, but it's a financial thing. Matter of fact, I was reading, and not that I didn't know, but like I said, the conversation when you're just talking in general, I was like, wow. I have told people or mentioned to people about stocks and stuff like that, and it's just like, okay, um, to you can talk about mutual funds all day long too. Matter of fact, I want to contact a couple people to find out how their mutual funds are doing. Because people have invested in mutual funds as a form of retirement, or put money there for their kids, or put money there for themselves. And I know that there was, there's stocks, there's bonds, there's T bills, all kinds of stuff where you can invest your money. Okay, you can invest your money at any one of the stores that you go to. That's on a New York Stock Exchange. But now we're going back to looking at, here it is, that conversation about homeless. Not homeless as it relates to, here it is, domestic. But how do we go about that? So if you're looking at somebody who's building something, you look at somebody who's building something, and they just said, okay, now they didn't got a loan or something from the federal government or from the bank, or they made, let's just say they started off with a grant. And somebody who, now how those people who you're helping going to get money? So that means that readily they need to create a program, which we do have programs where somebody is able to care for their finances. Do you understand where I'm coming from? So if you know that you have a whole lot of veterans and you want to make veteran, housing, then you will just focus on the veterans, and you would say, okay, well, now that I'm focused with the veterans, you will look at what is rarely available to the Veteran Administration. This is an organized group of people. These are people who want to come together and say, okay, well, we're going to focus just on veterans. Because there's different areas where you could just focus on something. Okay, so all the benefits that the veterans get as an organization, hey, we do have, there are cooperatives. And so when you're organizing our organization, there's cooperatives and organizations, all of them have a board, more or less. Let's put it like that. Now, you have somebody who's doing supportive services for them, meaning that they don't have to go that far to say, well, you know what, somebody has actually drawn up the paperwork for them. They accepted their application. They're making sure they get all the resources that they need. And that would be whether they're looking at Social Security, they're looking at this, looking at that, and now they have their shelter, they're looking at food, or whether they're looking at a big kitchen, or they have their own individual kitchen. Matter of fact, they can have their own kitchen, and then they can also have, let's say, the cafeteria or something like the general or the open house. Like I said, we have people who are in condos all the time. It just make you just be like, are we thinking about how we can make the money? You understand where I'm coming from? So now you have no different than how they have senior housing. Okay, so they build up senior housing. They have senior housing, and people who are 55 years or older, or the community is 65 and older. They have communities that way. The same thing with the veterans. It could be co-ed and so on and so forth. But then now you know that you're working in that special class. The same thing for, without looking at, let's say, witness protection or anything like that. But the same thing with women and children. You know they're getting food stamps, and you know that here it is, the county and the state have funding to support them. So what would you do? You would think that we do have people who are bright. I know we are, and I know we're doing it. But you'll be like, okay, well, you know what? Hey, there's different organizations, and yeah, honey, the organizations they do have where they provide shelter. But if you know that people are receiving the same thing, there's a cooperative right there. You know that the people them they need housing, and but there will be somebody who, let's say, again, an administrator or something, a special support staff or whatever that will help them make sure they get all their paperwork, make sure they, whether we're talking about vital records and so on and so forth, they're there to care for their stuff. You understand? To make sure that they have housing, and they know yet they are receiving resources. Now, what happens when there's no income? The same thing with people who are disabled. Okay, people who are disabled, they have all kind of resources. Matter of fact, it could just be a special organization or cooperative that focus on people who have disabilities. Okay, well, we want to talk about mental health. The same thing. They have hospitals, they have clinics, and yet there could be cooperatives and focus groups that says, okay, well, you know what? We want to combat these different things. Now, there are some people who are on the streets, and we say, okay, well, what about drugs? Now, we've seen TV. But hell, if they want to smoke weed all day and it's legal in your state, and that they have a problem, you know what I'm saying? I mean, could they have houses? Sure, there would be no reason why they should be homeless. We've seen TV where they wanted to sit there and talk about the crack house or the crack building. You know what I'm saying? That sucker was built up like it was open. They had all the little walls around and so on and so forth. I guess here it is. They have an allowance to make it really event. I don't know, but I'm just saying. I ain't gonna flip you. I'm like, well, here it is. What is the conversation about homelessness? Somebody who's working and they lost their job, and you want to say that here it is, they lost their employment, and yet we go through that cycle, and we talk about the Department of Labor, we talk about EDD and all that other kind of stuff, and they get their little insurance money. It's not enough. Now, if they had a lifestyle of things that they were trying to do, you know what I'm saying? Then you'd be like, okay, well, what about their savings? Now that's a whole nother bracket, because now they're, in regards to society, they need to be able to move on someplace else. And yes, here it is. People want, when they're working, they want to have a good name. There are some people who work and be having a bad name, and they get in the newspaper too. Oh, shit. You understand? Now, when you start looking at, here it is, these special classes where they say, okay, well, this, that, and the other. Then the question would be, well, then why are people homeless? And the organizations, not just here it is, because they have rights. Prostitutes have rights. Homeless people have rights. Disabled people have rights. People who are gay, they have rights. Women have rights. We all have rights. And you would think that yet. So anyway, I was listening to this gentleman too, and he said, well, listen, they know people who have gone and got their lawyer degree, who've done this, who've done that, and they can't find employment. And you would think that yet, here it is, what I just said, they would have hired them to do the research to make sure that here it is, people's rights were protected. I mean, do you understand what I'm saying to you? I know we do. Okay, what are some of the other ones? We have people who, like I said, being down on your luck and trying to bounce back up to get employment and stuff like that, for you to care for your family and things of that nature. Say yes. You know what I mean? You would think that those things were okay, that you would be out there trying to find work and employment. But if somebody, like we've seen ghosts. What? Oh, here it is. Oh, moons and things and this and that. People have made brothels, and they get paid for it. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? We do have madams, not just pimps. TTYO, people, thinking about it.